This is just water, even though I'm acting crazy. It's just water, Tim.
Everybody, welcome to the No Name Music Cast. My name's Tim, and this is
Joy.
And before we get going with this episode, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Jilbo, who I've just been talking to, and she has created the most amazing 80s Rubik's Cube, where she's replaced all the squares with 80s icons. And I think it's worthy of a mention. So, I mean, by the time this hits the air, it will actually be a week after I spoke to her. But even still, congratulations, Jilbo. It looked amazing.
He kept that complete secret to me. I had no idea that was a shout out, Jilbo. Woo!
Yay! So this week, it's my turn to pick the topic. And I decided to make it a topical topic because last week we sadly lost Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones. He was 80 years old and he lived a good life. And really, he was probably the glue that held the Rolling Stones together. Everyone talks about Mick and Keith, but I think Charlie sitting at the back playing very subtle jazzy drums was probably the thing that held that whole band together. Would you say that, Joy?
Yes, I read a few things that called him like the rock behind the Rolling Stones. And I was telling Tim, what's very interesting to me about Charlie Watts is he's also, I knew he was mostly known about his jazz roots, which gave the Rolling Stones their very distinct sound. We've talked about it, and I had never quite identified it when we talked about it. But then once I started reading all this stuff about Charlie Watts, I was like, it makes sense. They are a rock band, but they have this kind of like groove. But there's like a groove to them. And a lot of people were accrediting Charlie Watts to that. And that gave them their signature sound, which I think holds them together. But also, he looks just like a normal guy. It's very interesting to see him in comparison to all the other members. Do you know what I'm talking about, Tim?
Yeah, he like certainly Mick and Keith. They look like rock stars. Is what the way they dress, the way they present themselves. They look like rock stars. But Charlie Watts just wore a suit. He just looked like a very smart, very respectable English gentleman in a suit.
He definitely looks like an English gentleman. That's a great way to put it. But I do say I agree. They're the rock that holds them together. And that, from what I understand, he kind of defined their sound. He gave them that groove that they were looking for. So it was very sad to see that he passed away. Yeah,
and I think, we will cover some of these points later on in the episode, but I would say, I know they have a tour coming up, which he was supposed to do, and then he bowed out of before we lost Charlie, and they had somebody ready to sit in and take his place for the tour. But I would think once that tour is finished, I would probably think the Stones are done.
Probably. And what was Charlie? They said he was 80. How old are the rest of the members now at this point, around that age?
Yeah, Mick and Keith are probably, if they're not 80, they're certainly in their mid to late 70s.
My grandmother died in her 70s, and she was pretty rough. Now, given she had some eating disorders and stuff that contributed, but to be able to do that into your 80s is fantastic. But at the same point, they do look like maybe I think it's probably time just to move on, do something different. Doesn't mean they have to completely close up shop with music. I just don't know if the Rolling Stones will continue at this way they've been, basically.
Their pace, as it were.
Yeah, that's a good word. I couldn't figure out what word I was trying to say, but yeah, I don't know that it'll be the same.
There you go. Well, what I wanted to do is I didn't think it was worth doing a complete retrospective of the career of the Rolling Stones because their career is long and varied and has lots of tangents to it. And I figured in a 1 hour or so podcast episode, we probably couldn't even scratch the surface. So,
yeah, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
So what I thought I would do in this episode, I'm entitling this episode, What I Like About the Rolling Stones.
That's a very specific point, but okay.
So it doesn't actually encompass everything I like about the Rolling Stones because, I like a lot of their music and I like a lot of their albums and what have you. But I just pulled out some things that came to mind when I think of the Rolling Stones and things that I enjoy about them.
Okay.
So I'm opening up this episode, What I Like About the Rolling Stones. And the first thing I wanted to discuss, and this is probably the most important thing, more than the music, more than anything else about the Stones
That's a big point.
is Keith Richards' supposed immortality.
Okay, he kind of looks like a zombie. That's what I'm gonna say. Like, I mean, or hear me out. So you guys have heard me have some weird statements about the way people look, and I'm sorry, but at this point, he does kind of look a little bit like a zombie, but he also looks like a scarecrow, like a melted scarecrow. Okay, this is related to his immortality, I promise. But like, if I were to see a scarecrow come to life, I would think they would look exactly like Keith Richards. I don't know why, and the reason this relates. I can't even say this logically without laughing. The reason it relates is like a scarecrow. If it came to life, it'd probably be more. I don't know. He looks like somebody that if they were going to just keep going forever, like a scarecrow or a zombie. So I get it. Well, it's very not logical at all, but I get it.
Well, that's the thing when they talk about Keith Richards, because, you know, the running joke about Keith Richards is they say, you know, all of us are really going to have to think hard about the world we're leaving behind for Keith Richards.
I'm telling you, he looks exactly like if there were some type of, okay, maybe not, okay, a scarecrow and a zombie is a very extreme example. But let's say someone found the Fountain of Youth, and they found the Fountain of Youth when they were about like 50 or 60, right, Tim?
Mm-hmm.
He looks exactly like what I would think that person would look like, with his little fedora and his kind of, I hate to say, it's almost like a melted kind of face.
Well, the thing is, you know, about Keith Richards is he I wouldn't say he's abused drugs throughout his life. I think he's embraced drugs. I think that's the way to talk about it. And the funny thing about Keith is that I think it was in the 80s, he did a PSA on MTV telling kids not to do drugs. He was like, look, kids, I've been there. I've done that. You don't want to get involved in drugs. Stay away from drugs. And then some comedian on late night TV said, that's fine, Keith, but you did them all. There's none left for the kids to do.
Well, the other thing is if he isn't more, like if he's not, like, okay, so a lot of our, let's think like our Forever 27 Club and all these people who've done a lot of hard drugs, and they've died pretty young. How the heck is he still kicking?
Well, that's the thing. And then there's all these like conspiracy. Not so much a conspiracy. It's a thing that people started saying that wasn't true, and then he embraced it, and in the end he said it wasn't true. There's this thing apparently that like during the height of his drug crazed life, he went to Switzerland to have all of his blood replaced. Have you ever heard that before?
No. You guys couldn't see it, but my eyes got really big, and I looked at Tim like, what?
He went to Switzerland to have a complete blood transfusion.
Okay, logistically, that wouldn't work. I don't think you could change your entire blood out of your body. I feel like there'd be some type of reason why that wouldn't work. I'm not a scientist or a doctor. If you're a listener and you are, please give us the information we need here. But I'm a normal human being and don't think that's possible to get a complete blood transfusion of your entire body. Unless maybe you're a zombie and you don't have blood. Keith Richards, are you a zombie?
Well, I mean, maybe this is another No Name Musicast exclusive. I don't know. But I mean, a lot of people have said that, I mean, he will live forever. So I have absolutely no idea. But anyhow...
Okay.
The folklore of Keith Richards is something I very much enjoy.
And in No Name Musicast fashion, Keith Richards, if you're listening, we will have you on next week.
Yeah, we're
you
available.
You can defend whether you're a zombie. Did you have a full blood transfusion? We don't care. You can literally just sit here and say nonsense, and me and Tim will let you go on the podcast.
He's an interesting interview. He was interviewed by Terry Gross on NPR, and everyone knows Terry Gross is a very well-respected interviewer. And he referred to her as baby about every third word. And, I mean, in most normal circumstances, it would be demeaning, but the way that Keith Richards said it, it was just ridiculous.
Of course. That sounds like what I know of him. I've seen him a few times, and he kind of always just seemed a little over the top.
Yeah.
Like, it's for the best way I can explain it. And, I mean, if I were him... Okay, like guys, if I were a famous musician, okay, hot off the presses here, no name music classes. If I were to become a rock star, I would be as extreme I could be all the time because it would be so fun. So I can't even judge. Like I would be like, you guys would be like, why is she jumping off the couch in the interview? Because I can. You would never say I was boring.
Fabulous. Okay, so let's move on to the next topic of things I enjoy about the Rolling Stones. Now, this one is maybe a little bit of a deep dive, unless you're me, but I very much enjoy the song "Gimme Shelter."
Okay.
Now, there's several reasons why I like that song, and I'll come on to that in a second. But the primary reason I like "Gimme Shelter" by the Rolling Stones is in season 3, Knight Rider episode Goliath.
How did I know?
When Kit is driving down the Vegas Strip, Gimme Shelter is playing. And I don't know, it has the lights and it has the car and the Larson scanners going, and he pulls into Caesar's Palace and Gimme Shelter's playing, and then it cuts to the shot in the casino. And it's long been my favorite Rolling Stones song for its Knight Rider connection.
So I knew that it was either going to be a Knight Rider connection. Somehow David Hasselhoff was going to come in or something along those lines. But You know what's interesting about Give Me Shelter? And I say the same thing about Beast of Burden and a few other songs. How do they, and this is to that kind of what we were saying about earlier with Charlie Watts and stuff, with that kind of groove they have that you don't see with other people. Mm-hmm. That song is literally saying it's just a shot away. It's talking about rape, murder. It's just a shot away, right? It's a pretty deep song. Give Me Shelter is literally talking about give me shelter from these things.
Sure.
Beast of Burden, well, you don't even need to get into it. It's pretty bad. But what I was getting at, though, is listening to it, the juxtaposition between the music and the lyrics are so crazy to me because growing up as just a general listener of the Rolling Stones. And then as I got older, I got more interested in music and started doing a little bit more research and reading articles and doing things like that. I never realized what they were actually singing about because that groove, that sound is so poppy and so fun and kind of takes the rock music and makes it more eccentric and more, I guess, palatable to the general public. It's actually crazy to me. That's what I truly think of every time I think of the Rolling Stones is how interesting their lyrics are versus the way the music sounds.
Yeah, I mean, the majority of the Rolling Stones songs are written by Mick and Keith, and I'm assuming that Keith majority writes the music and Mick majority writes the lyrics, but I don't know that. I'm sure that...
That's what I've always assumed, but I have no idea.
Yeah, but I'm sure both of them are equally capable in both things, because Mick Jagger plays guitar. I mean, he doesn't play guitar a lot, but he does play guitar.
I've seen him play guitar, yeah.
Yeah. So, it's interesting that they were considered like these bad boy rockers back in the day, but they're a lot deeper on the surface than you think.
Well, and I actually think that contributes to... I actually have a theory a lot of the time when it comes to because they were rock artists, but they were pop in the sense that they were popular in the time. Pop music, if you guys didn't know, we've said it many times. Sid knows what I'm saying. It's just the popular music of the time. Sure. I know people think of Britney Spears when we hear pop, but it's not necessarily true. So let's equate them to popular rock music of the time. I have a theory that a lot of people who are great musicians or who are good at what they do, they play to their audience and they know what people want. People don't want to hear like dark and, people don't always want to hear almost like a Mr. type deep kind of sound. Mm-hmm. And they knew that wasn't going to sell. And that's what makes them so fun. And the other thing is, look at Mick Jagger's dancing. Would he have been able to dance to something that was that dark? Probably not.
No, I don't think so.
To change it up. But I'm just saying, though, I do think that they were playing to their times. That actually plays to them knowing what was going to sell at that moment,
Exactly. And the other, also getting back to Give Me Shelter, one thing that's interesting about it is that Keith Richards plays both the guitar parts. This was after Brian Jones was either left the Rolling Stones at that point or was on the outs of the Rolling Stones. And it's very unusual on a Stones track to have Keith Richards playing both parts. He's playing the rhythm and the lead, which is unusual.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. I mean, that just is how talented he is, though.
And
I mean, you can. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, and are you also aware of the backing vocalist on that track, Mary Clayton?
I am aware of Mary Clayton, but I don't know a whole lot about her. But I did know that she sings on that. And doesn't she do something else for some other people or something?
Yeah, she had a
She's
career.
She's an African American lady. Yeah.
Yeah, she had a career after recording Gimme Shelter, but on Gimme Shelter, she was heavily pregnant when she recorded it, and apparently, I mean, they don't know if this was the reason, but she lost the baby.
Yeah. That's the only thing I know about her. I know that she was a gospel singer. She sang the backing on that and something about losing a baby. As bad as that sounds, that's all I know about her.
Yeah, no.
But she was apparently a very known. She did backing vocals for a lot of people. Okay, so we're gonna have a tangent here, Tim. As the vocalist, like I've talked about, that's my interest is being a vocalist, and Tim's interest is being a guitarist. They actually say the way to make money as a vocalist is to do backing tracks or sing backup vocals for like major bands and like go across because you can like go to many different things. They say it's a really great way to make money.
Yeah, I can see that because if you're in a band, you would probably be paying back some kind of retainer from the record label.
Mm-hmm.
It's not guaranteed that you're going to make money or the record's going to be a hit. But if you're booked for a session, you're booked in as a session artist. You wouldn't likely get a royalty from it, but you'd go in and you'd earn your session fee, and it's an hour of your time, and then you move on.
Well, and the other thing is, so they say to do backing vocals or to do like backups, the backup singers at concerts and stuff. And the cool thing, I always thought about that as somebody who likes, so you know how like you hear these artists who play the same song over and over again and they get tired of playing the same song over and over again? Mm-hmm. Well, if you perform backup vocals for multiple people, you'd probably not burn out as quickly because you get to sing different things.
Sure.
Just theory. But I've actually heard that if you're good, because you don't have to be a standout vocalist, you just have to know how to match pitch and rhythm and know how to harmonize well. And then, yeah, I've always heard that's a really good way to go for a basic vocalist. If anybody's listening for a tip out there.
Well, it's funny, actually. That segues into another thing I like about the Rolling Stones. And this is actually just a thing that I like about Mick Jagger, to be fair. But he's a Rolling Stone, so it all ties up together.
He is a Rolling Stone.
As you probably know, and I think we've discussed this before, maybe on the podcast or outside of the podcast, on Carly Simon's You're So Vain, Mick Jagger sings the backing vocal.
Well, I think it's when we had that whole conversation about Carly Simon, which I'm going to say You're So Vain is probably one of my, as weird as it is probably one of my top songs in the entire world. Absolutely adore that song. And I think what I like about it is just how it flows so easily. Like, I kind of enjoy when music is not as, and this is going to sound weird. I hate when people think that all music has to be so over the top, like make you feel all these great emotions and all this stuff. Sometimes I really like just something that flows, that's fun, that's easy. Carly Simon does that well.
Yeah.
And so that's up there with one of my top songs.
Absolutely. But do you know what's interesting as well about Mick Jagger?
Mick Joker. Okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know he was a McDonald's
Mick Jagger,
character.
who also played the Joker in Batman. No. Mick Jagger, who also sang backing vocals on the Beatles' Baby You're a Rich Man. Did you know that?
That I did know. That's an exclusive, guys. Mark that off your bingo card if you didn't know it.
Yeah, from the Yellow Submarine soundtrack. I was researching this episode and I was looking into Mick Jagger and stuff, and they said, "Oh, he sang backing vocals on Baby You're a Rich Man." I did not know that.
I always find it interesting when you find that out about like main stars, like they wrote this song you didn't know they write, or they sang back. You know what I mean? It's always interesting how that works.
Exactly. Well, I am continuing on my list of things I like about the Rolling Stones. One thing that is always iconic about the Rolling Stones is their tongue logo.
Oh, I knew what you meant. For some reason, I had it. Never mind. Continue.
Well, I mean, a lot of bands will have an iconic logo, or their name will be presented in a certain way. I mean, Queen had a few different ones. The Beatles obviously had their very iconic The Beatles. And like you have Steve Miller, who has that horse type graphic that he has on a lot of his albums.
Yeah.
But the Rolling Stones have that tongue logo.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even need to have the Rolling Stones written on it. All it needs is it just needs the logo. And when you see the logo, you know exactly what that is.
You 110% associated with the Rolling Stones. And I mean, I can obviously see it in my head at all times, which is interesting, though. I wonder who invented that logo, because that person was very smart at marketing. I wonder if it came from a member of the Rolling Stones or if somebody else come up with that.
Well, I was always of the opinion it was Andy Warhol that created it. And that's someone told me that long ago, and I thought that was the case. But again, when I was researching this episode, it was an English art designer called John Pasche, P-A-S-C-H-E, Pache, John Pache.
I see why you would think it's an Andy Warhol because of the pop art type thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And then they made there was another guy called Craig Braun, Braun, who did a little bit of extra work on it and just tidied it up a little bit. But that is not an Andy Warhol, and I was surprised to find that.
But you're 110% right. I don't have to see the Rolling Stones above it to associate it with the Rolling Stones.
No, it's so iconic that you see that design. Like if you saw somebody wearing a T-shirt with I don't know, some kind of design, you wouldn't necessarily know what band that represented if it was a little bit obscure. But you see that big tongue, you know who it is.
It's the red lips with the white teeth and the red tongue.
Exactly.
That's the Rolling Stones. And even it doesn't even have to be that color scheme. If that's that general lip shape and that tongue sticking out and it was just different colors, you'd still probably associate it with the Rolling Stones, truthfully.
Exactly. I mean, I was going to come on to say that. I mean, one of the other things I like about the Rolling Stones is Voodoo Lounge and the fact I saw that tour, which I'll come on to in a second. But when that tour came out, they made a slight change to that tongue, and the tongue had like little spikes coming out of it. But even just as a kind of different design type thing. But even still, it was so iconically the Rolling Stones.
The only thing that I can think that is close to that, but I wouldn't say it's as iconic, is maybe the Grateful Dead, the little bears.
Mm-hmm.
The little dead bears, like the little cute little colorful bears or whatever they are. I always associate them with the Grateful Dead, even if the Bears not necessarily says the Grateful Dead, but that's the closest other band I can think that has something that iconic to that.
Yeah, because normally, like as I said, like the Beatles, you see their name presenting in a certain way, but it's not like there's a beetle on the ground and you think that's the Beatles, but the tongue is the Stones. One of the other things I really like about the Rolling Stones is the fact I went to see them in 1995 on their Voodoo Lounge tour.
Okay.
And I would ask the question, have you ever seen the Rolling Stones?
Not in person, no.
Well, I remember going
I've seen them from a distance on a TV screen, if that counts.
But you haven't seen them in the actual, in real life. Well, I saw them in, I said, 95 at Wembley Stadium. It was the
Tim, I would have been 5. You have to keep in perspective my age. I would have been 5 years old when you saw them.
Yeah, when I saw the Rolling Stones, I was 62 years old.
You guys heard it first here. Tim is actually 110 years old, which is why he cut out from the main world in 1990.
There you go, see. Well, when I saw him in 95 at Wembley, I said the Black Crowes were supporting him. I think we've spoken about that before, but
yeah.
their set is so killer. I mean, like every song is like boom, 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 and then they played 2, maybe 3 songs off the Voodoo Lounge album, which I know you're familiar with because I challenged you to listen to that a few episodes back. But what strikes you is like how strong all of their songs are. And the other thing is, I mean, I've seen concerts at Wembley Stadium before, and it normally fills one end of the stadium, and screens and the big stage and stuff. But they bought this production that was absolutely massive, and it had some kind of like, I think it was a snake, I'm not sure. Some kind of metallic thing that came out that was like an animal, and it breathed fire. Okay.
I was thinking like a real snake until you said it breathed fire. And I was like, I may have been 5 in 95, but I don't know that I'm that elementary. That I don't know that snakes actually. I was imagining, I was like, they brought a real snake out. And then when you said it breathed fire, I was like, oh, okay. Might have been animatronic snake.
No, this thing was huge. It was taller than the roofline of Wembley Stadium. And when it breathed fire, I was about halfway back, and you could feel it. You could feel the temperature of the flame coming off it.
How is that? Okay. Who does like this is completely random. And Tim, this is only me asking because I know you've worked on and been in many shows, but I don't know that you've been in this high level of production before. I could be wrong. Who has to go through to prove that stuff? Like, who's the person that says, yes, you can have your fire breathing snake?
Well, anything with fire, typically there is like a fire marshal who is over the town or the facility or the local council or something like that. Because I know when David Gilmour played Pompeii, which is a great concert, incidentally, you should check out if you haven't seen it before. He wanted Round the Edge of Pompeii at certain points in the song, certainly for the big finale, he wanted the fireworks and pyros to go off on them. And they said it was touch and go almost up to showtime, whether the whatever authority or whatever town council or whoever is over
so it's the local person probably.
Yeah, and then, I'm sure their fire department have to approve it, and there's a process
somebody
and stuff
on
like that.
Site in case something goes wrong.
Yeah, and all that kind of stuff. So I think Wembley is in the London Borough of Brent. So I'd imagine there's probably some kind of health and safety executive over Brent that would have to approve the fire-breathing snake.
That makes sense. I was just like, somebody has to be over all those pyrotechs. You know what I mean? And you've heard horror stories of like in foreign countries that maybe don't have as big as regulations where stages have fell through, things have caught fire, stuff like that.
Well, there was that whole thing in this country with Great White. They had a show in a club and it burnt the entire club down and people lost their lives. It was terrible.
I know exactly what you're talking about. That was a whole thing. I forgot about that till you said it. When was that, Tim?
That was early 2000s, probably.
It wasn't that long ago because I remember it making news.
I do remember some Rough Justice, the fabled rock band that I was in the 90s when I still consider...
Did you guys burn a club down?
Yeah, and I still consider myself a member of, even though I haven't played for Rough Justice for some time. But Hogg, the singer, not his real name, went through a phase of getting involved with pyrotechnics. By pyrotechnics, I mean like flash pots that you'd have in amateur dramatic
Hogg
type
sounds
stuff.
like somebody who would get involved with pyrotechnics based on everything you've said.
So we once played, I think it was Brunel University Student Union Bar, and we closed that show with Freebird with pyrotechnics. And I seem to remember the other guitar player, who was Russ at the time, he was standing somewhere near it, and Hogg fired it off, and it missed him by not a great deal, and he was not happy. He lost
some eyebrow hairs.
Yeah, he was not happy. And this was of course, at this time I was using no hearing protection, and I remember it was very loud.
So that's the longest name for a bar I've ever heard.
Well, Brunel University Student Union Bar. Well, like in England, a lot of universities have a student union, and then they have events and they have things like that. But
that makes sense.
But a lot of people get involved with the student union because when you join the student union, you can go to their bar, and their bar typically is very cheap. It's normally run at no profit or very small profit. So you go to the student union bar.
I mean, that makes sense. I get it. I see why that would be beneficial. It's just a very long name for a bar.
Yeah, exactly. And then there was also the other Rough Justice gig with Pyros where we played... It was in Stoke Poges, which is just outside of Slough. And I think it was Stoke...
I can't take these names seriously. Like, Stoke Poges? What's that even mean?
It's just outside of Slough. Anyway, so we played in Stoke Poges. It was Stoke Place Country Club, which is a weird place for a noisy rock band. But we played it, and again, Hogg was in his pyro phase, and we played an AC/DC song, and he set these pyros off, and they went bang. And then what happened is that this country club had an incredibly high ceiling, and you could see the smoke starting to waft up into the ceiling. And when it got right up into the ceiling, there were smoke detectors up there, and it set the fire alarm off. Now, we didn't have to evacuate the building because whoever owned the club came out and said, "Oh, don't worry about it, we'll just get it turned off." However, there was a care home for disabled people next door and an old people's home beside it, and they had to evacuate them.
Tim. That's terrible. Those poor people.
Yeah,
was it the middle of the night?
Well, it was 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, probably.
That's terrible.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not condoning this act. I'm just recounting recounting what happened. And also, should say this was very early on in my tenure with Rough Justice. So this was about 1995 or so.
Well, I just imagine all these old people in Slough, or however you said that.
Slough.
Which just makes me think of like slaw, but that's not related. All these old people going out, darn them kids at like 10 p.m.
Yeah, and
being wheeled out.
And the worst thing, as I said, one of them was like a home for people with disabilities. There's all people coming out with carers. It was a mess.
Okay, I laughed really hard. I feel bad for laughing. That might be the hardest I've laughed on one of our podcasts in a while. That's just terrible, Tim. Oh, those people probably still hold a grudge.
They probably do. They're like that flipping rock band, Rough Justice.
those darn rock stars with their drums and their guitars and fire, making us leave at 10 o'clock. I was almost asleep. Heck, if I had to work the next day and you had to get me out of here at 10 p.m., I'd probably be mad too. Okay, that was really funny.
And I think, actually, now I come to think of it, as I'm thinking back in my memory, I think fire engines, as you would say in England, came because I think because of the kind of facilities they were. It's one
they're
of those
probably
things,
required to come.
Yeah, they're required to send people. So I think there was a fire engine or two that turned up as well.
It's like our work, Tim. If something gets set off, they're required to come with the type of work we do.
Sure, absolutely. I think it was the same kind of thing. So it was quite a mess. And I could be wrong, but I think the pyrotechnic idea was either retired or not used as keenly after that.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say that the sprinklers went off and ruined all your equipment, but you made it. I mean, I think I would have rather, I don't know, the sprinklers going off would have been bad, but wow. What year was this, Tim?
This was probably 1995.
Okay, so right around the same time. Well, Tim, I never knew that about you.
I was merely a cog in the machine at that point. Rough Justice wasn't my life. It was just a band that I was a part of.
It sounds like an episode of a sitcom, truthfully. All right. What's next on your list now that I laughed for 20 minutes in everybody's ear?
Okay, so back to things I like about the Rolling Stones. Well, one thing that's interesting about the Rolling Stones is that they are probably the greatest rock and roll band in the world. And when you think of not rock, but rock and roll and rhythm and blues and things like that, the Rolling Stones is probably the definitive article. But what's interesting about the Rolling Stones is that their career has been so long and varied. They've embraced so many genres of music. Like at the beginning of their career, they were really more of a kind of a rhythm blues type band. They were playing a lot of African American music back to the UK audience, and then in fact later on selling it back to the US audience. But as you follow their career, they even started doing things like they embraced disco. I mean, like Miss You. That's a disco song.
110% it's a disco song. And as a disco lover, I love it.
Yeah, and then recently they came out with a blues album. I think it was about 2 years ago, called Blue and Lonesome, and it was just pure blues. Yeah.
Well, and that's what's very interesting. I guess that kind of goes back to what we were saying, is they might have been a rock and roll band, but there was a lot of talent and just pure good musicianship from them.
Sure.
Which is why they stood the test of time. And also, we talked about on another episode, we kind of discussed how some artists can move away from that, what they're known as, and do it well, and some don't always. And I think some of that comes down to the music tree of them. I think our ZZ Top episode, we talked a little bit about that, because they had where they kind of changed from a soul kind of rhythm kind of sound and then went pop, and there was a whole thing between them.
Sure.
I would say the same thing with the Rolling Stones. They have very different, distinct sounds depending on what era of the Rolling Stones you're listening to.
Exactly. But there you go. It's just something that I've always admired about them, because, like you say, some bands, you listen to their entire catalogue, and it's much of a muchness, really. They could have 20 albums in their
It all sounds
discography.
the same a
And
little.
they're like AC/DC. AC/DC is fabulous. I love AC/DC. Their music is
example.
great. But like once you've heard one AC/DC album, within some degree, you've heard every single AC/DC album.
I can agree with that's a good example of what I mean. Yeah.
I mean, AC/DC never went disco. AC/DC don't have a pop album. AC/DC never played the blues. It's just AC/DC play AC/DC music, and it's great, but that's what you get.
But also, and then in some ways, it's kind of nice when an artist knows what they're good at.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes people don't want them to step away from what they're good at. Because no offense to AC/DC, but I don't know that I could have heard some of them do a disco album and been like taking it seriously.
No, I would not want to hear Angus and the boys go disco.
I was going to say Angus Young. I don't know how I would have felt on a disco album, but I mean, I almost said Guns N' Roses, but even they kind of, I think, deviated a little bit from their sound a few times. They weren't stagnant.
They did, and in fact, one of the points I was going to come on to was the fact that the Guns N' Roses actually covered "Sympathy for the Devil." Have you heard that track?
I have. It's very good, actually, and they did a great job. And another one that I would say that they even Guns N' Roses kind of deviated even well, but their cover of that is fantastic. And Axl Rose gets a lot of, I guess, I don't know. I think he gets a lot of flack for his voice, but I think he did it well.
Sure. I mean, Axl Rose has a very iconic voice that's very much Axl Rose.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it seems like he can be a little screechy, I guess.
Sure, but I mean, he's singing in the style of Axl Rose, and that's what Axl Rose does.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why anybody would expect any different. That's a good point.
There you go. All right. Well, another thing I'm going to come on to about things I like about the Rolling Stones, and you thought the "Gimme Shelter" one was a particularly personal recollection, but this one is likely even more personal.
Okay.
So, in 2005, I lived in Twickenham, which is in just outside of London, or it's where all my not far from where I grew up.
I feel like we need to start like a map and put little pins on everywhere as we say in the podcast. All right, continue.
Yeah, Twickenham. It's near Richmond. You get on the 281 bus from Hounslow. You know where that is?
Yes, been there, done that.
Okay. Well, I used to live on the Staines Road in Twickenham, and I shared a house with some musician friends and my dear friend Jules, who we lost a few years ago. But anyhow, he went off and played a gig up in London, and he I think it was with his band, or whether he was sitting in with another band, I can't remember, but he went off and did some quite high profile gigs and worked with different people.
Okay.
And on the bill of this gig was Mick Taylor. Now, Mick Taylor was the guitarist in the Rolling Stones who replaced Brian Jones. Brian Jones left the Rolling Stones, and then he was a lot of I think he was doing drugs and goodness knows what, and I think he was found dead in the bottom of a swimming pool. But anyhow, there was a void in the Rolling Stones, and Mick Taylor came along. And Mick Taylor was the guitarist in the Stones for a lot of classic tracks, Only Rock and Roll, and a lot of their...
Yeah, he's the one I'm a little bit more familiar with.
Yeah, in the 70s, he was their second guitar player together with Keith Richards. Then after a while, I think he was either deemed not a good fit, or he left, or something like that. And then Roddy Wood joined, and that's the Rolling Stones lineup that we've had for decades and decades.
Yeah.
Anyhow, Mick Taylor has gone on to have a career in music and played in different bands, and Mick Taylor Band and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so my dear friend Jules was out doing this gig, and he was doing it on the same bill as Mick Taylor. So backstage, I think this was like, it was like the Astoria or the Brixton Academy. It was a reasonably large venue, I do know that.
Huh?
So he was backstage and was talking to Mick Taylor, as you would if you had the opportunity to. The guy's iconic. He was in the Rolling Stones.
Of course.
And for some reason, Mick Taylor gave him his guitar to look after. Now, the full ins and outs of this, I don't know. But Mick Taylor obviously has a large guitar collection of various instruments he's owned through the years. But this particular Fender-style guitar with EMG pickups is one that I'd seen him on the cover of Guitarist magazine with. On researching it, I've seen him play it in a number of different scenarios. So it's a guitar that he's associated with. He gave it to Jules to look after and then disappeared. And then
I'd be like, Mr. Taylor, I have your guitar still. Hello?
Yeah, and I think he tried to give this back to people, or maybe this happened at a bar outside the venue, but it was something to do with this gig that he played. So he ended up...
I wouldn't like this responsibility.
Yeah, so he ended up in a gig bag with Mick Taylor's guitar. So he didn't know what to do. So he wanted, he was a good guy. He wanted to make sure it got back to Mick Taylor. So he brought it home with him. And I think they contacted Mick Taylor's manager or Mick Taylor's publishing company or something. They had a dialogue with the Mick Taylor world.
Well, somebody at the venue probably had to have.
Yeah, so, but we had Mick Taylor's guitar in the house. I'm not exaggerating, for maybe a year.
That's so random, Tim.
Yeah, and it was just like, it just became a fixture of the front room. It's like, well, there's the sofa and there's the TV and there's Mick Taylor's guitar in a gig bag. It was weird. And I will say, in the end, they came for it, or it was dropped off somewhere, and it got back to Mick Taylor.
How many guitars do you have that you just lend one out to some guy behind stage and forget all about it for a year?
Yeah, I mean, that's different. I mean, I'm lucky. I've got some nice guitars, and if a very close musician friend needed one for a project, I would probably lend it to them, and I would expect it to get it back. But just a random, just like, hey, I saw you playing on the bill. I liked your playing. Can you just look after this for me? I've got to go. What?
That kind of goes back to, what episode was it where we talked about that celebrity found a tennis court on his property during quarantine?
Oh, is that ludicrous or something like that?
They're not living in the same world we are, Tim. Here's my guitar. Oh yeah, I lent that to that guy at that one concert for a year. I'll get it back eventually.
Yeah, and I mean, Jules was a really good guy, and the instrument ended up going back to him at some point. But it was just odd that we had this thing in our house.
I know, and I'd be worried, be like, don't spill anything on it, don't accidentally kick it. Like, that is very random, Tim. You had it for a year?
I remember it being a fixture for a long time. If it wasn't a year, it was like 6 months or so.
That's so weird. Like, I mean, no offense, like, if I let someone borrow something from me and it was worth, how much would you say this guitar is worth, Tim?
I mean, it wasn't terribly. It was a parts put together Strat guitar with EMGs. If you had to build one from parts, there's probably less than $1,000 invested in it.
Oh, well, I could let someone borrow my $30. Whatever. And I'd be like, hey, that was $30. I need that back.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not a $250,000 59 Les Paul. I mean, it's whatever.
And not the cost of a house. No,
exactly.
But yeah, they just give their guitars out to the world and find tennis courts on their property. They're living very different lives than us, Tim.
Well, I tell you what, on the subject of guitars, one thing that many people are not aware of, especially if you're not a guitar player, about Keith Richards. So he predominantly plays in a G tuning. So he doesn't tune his guitar like a regular electric guitar. He tunes it to an open G chord. But what's interesting about that is he only plays with 5 strings, not 6. He removes the bottom E string.
Is that because it's tuning it to a G sound?
Yeah, I mean, you could have open G tuning with the bottom E, but for whatever reason, the 5-string open G tuning is the thing that gives him his Keith Richards sound. Yeah, I mean, he has played lead guitar through his career, as we mentioned earlier in Gimme Shelter, but a lot of his sound is that classic rhythm guitar. And if you try and play Rolling Stones songs in regular tuning, you can do it, but it never sounds quite right. But if you
sound just a little off.
Yeah, but if you put it in that open G tuning, it instantly is like, yep, that's how it's done.
Well, that also kind of goes back to what you're saying, that they have that distinct sound. There's just something so distinct about the Rolling Stones, and by doing that, you're giving yourself that ability. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
But the other thing about that is, I don't know if you've heard this rule, and I'm going to equate it to a writer. So have you ever heard that you have to know the rules of grammar to be able to break the rules of grammar to make it work in a book? So there are certain writers, like old school writers, who sometimes didn't write grammatically correct, but they had to know the rules of grammar to break the rules. It's almost like he has to know how to play the guitar well to do it differently. Do you get what I'm saying? Like you have to know the rules to make that work for you. If someone random on the street just try to do that, it'd probably sound really awkward.
Yeah, because I mean, he played in standard tuning for many years, and I think at some point he adopted that as his style. I mean, he still plays standard tuning, I'm sure, but
yeah.
whenever you see him with that Telecaster he plays that he calls Makaiba, it is in the 5-string G tuning.
Interesting. Yeah. An example of what I meant was like there's like some writers who write in like almost like a Southern accent or a Southern twang. Mm-hmm. And so it's not grammatically standard, but they do it well because they know how grammar works. They know how things flow. And so that's what I kind of meant. Like it's almost like he knows how to play so well that he can make that work for him. But your average Joe couldn't do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There you go. Okay.
Sorry if there's somebody out there named Joe. I'm sorry. It's just a figure of speech.
we may have a listener called Joe. I don't know. We've been noticing that our podcast has been being listened to quite eagerly recently. So maybe there's somebody called Joe. So if you're out there, Joe, welcome. Thank you for listening.
Yes, that was just a figure of speech, Joe. Please keep listening.
So another recollectional thing I like about the Rolling Stones is in 2008, where you was probably going by using my shoddy maths, was you 12 or something?
I was graduating high school.
There you go.
So I'd have been 18.
Yeah, there you are. In 2008, I was still living in England, and Hannah was living with me in England at the time. And as you would imagine, the Thanksgiving holiday is not really celebrated in London to any degree.
Really? That's almost like I was for sure they were celebrating the July 4th too, man.
So we used to go out of our way to try and find places that would do Thanksgiving food on Thanksgiving. And it's hard to find, but we found a couple of places. And I think the previous year, I can't remember where we went the previous year, it was somewhere up in London. But in 2008, we went to Bill Wyman's Sticky Fingers restaurant. Now, Bill Wyman was the original bass player in the Rolling Stones, and I believe it was in the late 80s or early 90s, he left the Rolling Stones. He'd had enough of it. And they never had an official...
Like a Rolling Stone, he was gone.
Yeah, he was the stone that rolled.
I'll be here all week.
Yeah. So they never actually officially replaced him. They had a guy who toured with them and played in the studio with them, but that guy was salary. He was not a Rolling Stone. So whenever you would see them pictured, you'd never see the bass player picture because he was just a salary musician. But when Bill Wyman left, I mean, he had some solo songs and did some different things. But he opened up a restaurant in London called Sticky Fingers. And Sticky Fingers, of course, is the name of a Rolling Stones album. And he wasn't there, though. I'd heard that if he's in town, he often will go to Sticky Fingers just to sit at the bar and have a drink because it's his restaurant.
As you would.
But as I said, in 2008, they were doing a Thanksgiving dinner. So we went to Sticky Fingers. And we had a fabulous food when we were there.
So moral story is to made a fabulous Thanksgiving dinner at Sticky Fingers. Okay.
There you go. And the whole place was full of Rolling Stones memorabilia. And I seem to remember the gentleman's bathroom was amazing. I think it had like neon lights in it, and it may have had the tongue logo in there and something. But I remember it was great. I remember it almost being as good as the Kiss Coffee House.
So what I was going to say, so you didn't get stuck in that bathroom like that hotel room, right?
No.
As soon as you said that, it's all I could think of is you getting stuck in the glass of that bathroom. All right, Tim. Well, we're probably getting closer to where you're into your list, but what else is there, sir, besides bathrooms?
Well, I think I may have covered this before, but Mick Jagger, well, certainly the Rolling Stones in general, they're from Richmond, and they're not Richmond, Virginia, but Richmond, Surrey. I don't know if you knew that.
No, but I'll take your word for it.
Okay, Richmond is just down the road from Twickenham, which is where I used to live.
I didn't think it was Richmond, Virginia, though.
No. And they used to play at a venue in Richmond called the Crawdaddy Club, which is where they first started playing their music. They also, in Twickenham, there's an island called Eel Pie Island, and they famously used to play on Eel Pie Island.
Wait, is it eel like an eel or like ill?
Eel, like as in an electric eel.
So EEL.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they also used to play on Eel Pie Island. So they're very much associated with that area. And to this day, Mick Jagger does live in Richmond. And I don't think he's married to her anymore, but at the time, certainly when in the 90s, he was married to the actress Jerry Hall.
Yeah.
And I was working at Superdrug in Richmond in the 90s, which is a job I did not very much enjoy, and I couldn't wait to leave there, and I was very happy when I did, but that's a story for another podcast episode. But I was out on my lunch, and I was going out to purchase a sandwich or something from Tesco, and I looked up, and who was coming the other way? Jerry Hall.
I think you told me this once.
I think I may have, but to be honest, I was running out of ideas.
No, because we had this whole conversation about would you even notice if someone walked by. By the way, I can testify Tim did learn some skills from that job because 2 years ago, I had to do this help for the holidays thing at work, and Tim helped me put a lot of hygiene products up on a table very quickly and organized.
Yeah, I mean, my skills for unboxing and, as they call it in the trade, facing up a shelf. Are not to be questioned.
They're unmatched. Lots of hygiene products went up very quickly. Me and him just throwing them out on that table and him refacing them all. Well, not related to the Rolling Stones, but anyway.
No, I mean, there's nothing wrong with working in a CVS, Boots, Superdrug type place, but having done it for a number of years, it was very clear it was not for me.
It was not your long-term goal.
No, I think it builds character. I think it's good to have a job like that, but I think as a long-term endeavor for the likes of me, it wasn't necessarily what I was looking for.
I've worked retail, and I can agree with that statement. But did you acknowledge Jerry when he walked by? Did you smile at him? Did you give him any indication? Did you even know it was him?
Well, Jerry's a female.
Okay. Oh, yeah, it was the one he was dating, married to, something.
He's married to, yeah. No,
sorry, you guys heard it here first. He was actually a man. I forgot who Jerry was.
And that's fine, Mick Jagger. We don't judge on this podcast.
That's 100% fine. But I completely forgot we were talking about somebody he was married to. So did you wave at her? Did you make any acknowledgement?
No, I was just walking along and I looked up and I went, "Oh, it's Jerry Hall," and then she walked past me.
Well, do you even remember what she was wearing?
I seem to remember she was wearing some kind of like whitey coloured flowing dress and some kind of like sun hat affair.
Well, I mean, that's fair. I don't even know what she looks like. As you can remember, I don't even remember if she's a woman at this point. But I mean, I know who I've heard that name before, kind of floated, but I wouldn't be able to tell you who she was. So you did better than me, Tim. She would walk past me and I'd be like, "Oh, nice dress," but I have no clue who she was.
And I tell you what, ladies and gentlemen, with Joy being completely unable to identify the spouse of the Rolling Stones, we are going to leave it there.
All right. Bye.
See you later. Bye-bye.